Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Let's get rolling. I wanted to talk about something in a very different direction than the things that I've discussed previously in this podcast, and that is various religious organizations that seem to me to be on the downward slide. As a sociologist, my two areas of specialization have been the sociology of religion and social theory, sometimes called sociological theory. And this will basically be Mark, the sociologist of religion. As a sociologist of religion, my primary interest has been in what we call in the sociology of religion new religious movements, or occasionally alternative religious movements. New religious movements, or NRM, are movements which, at least as I define it, began somewhere from the 19th century, meaning the 1800s, until the present day. That is my definition. Some people would place the origin at a much later date, say at the beginning of the 20th century. That is fine as well. But the movement that I am talking about, that I will be talking about today, is a movement which basically started in the 1950s and 1960s. And I will give you the name of the founder of that movement by a name that, even if you've heard of him, you most likely have not heard this name. And that is Marwan Shahriar-Irani. Ever heard of Marwan Shahriar-Irani before? That is the birth name of a man who came to be called by his disciples Meher Baba. Meher Baba means compassionate father, or more precisely, compassionate papa or compassionate daddy. That's who Meher Baba was. He claimed to be an avatar, an incarnation or descent of God, and he had many followers, still has quite a few followers. He never had an organized religious structure. And I think that was Meher Baba's major failing in not establishing some type of organization. Because after Meher Baba died, Meher Baba, who had a very charismatic personality, was unable to, the late Meher Baba, was unable to do something that we called in sociology routinize his charisma. That is a term coined by the sociologist Max Weber. The routinization of charisma is where the charisma or the personal magnetism of the founder of a religion, a political party, or something else is institutionalized, is turned into a part of everyday life, so that even without the founder being alive, that charisma is still there, but it's there not in that person, but in the organization which that person started. Well, with Meher Baba, there was no such single organization. There were many organizations which were established by followers of Meher Baba, who generally call themselves Baba lovers, and some organizations which were not started by Meher Baba at all. There was one organization in New York City, where I'm originally from, called the Society for Avatar Meher Baba. It no longer exists. What I heard, and again, this is only what I heard, is that the problem with that organization was that it was led by a very authoritarian person. And that person was very intolerant of dissenting ideas. And so eventually the organization fell apart. There was another organization which was much more relaxed, called the Meher Baba House, which survived the death of the society. I do not know whether the Meher Baba House exists anymore. What I can tell you is that the majority of organizations which existed during the lifetime of Meher Baba are no longer around. And one might expect that because there was nothing to hold them together. There was no glue that Meher Baba gave them. And so, understandably, without the presence of the charismatic leader, the organizations that were inspired by him, or in some cases established by him, usually indirectly, had no basis for existing. The main center for the Meher Baba movement in the US is in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. That is a very large center. A lot of followers of the movement go there. I knew somebody who moved right into Myrtle Beach to be right near that movement, and I will get to him in just a bit. He was shunned by that organization, and from that point on, I did some looking, some searching. I was thinking about why would my friend, and I will not use his name here, shunned by this major Meher Baba organization. I found out. Partially because he told me, partially because his friend, Steve, who is still alive as far as I know, told me, and partially because other people told me. But it was not hard to find this stuff out. I mean, this guy had regular encounters with law enforcement, and not very good ones. He had a large collection of dogs, a large collection of dogs. I don't know exactly how many. I'm not even sure what kind of dog, but they were large dogs, large dogs. He had like 10 of them in his suburban Myrtle Beach house. That particular community where my friend lived had a restriction on the size of dogs and on the number of dogs that any one person could have. And my friend was well beyond that restriction. And so regularly, law enforcement would pay him a visit and tell him that he needed to get rid of some of those dogs. Apparently, he would often let them outside of his house. They would go wandering, and the neighbors would often become frightened. And I think justifiably so. These were big animals, and they were protective of my friend and rather hostile toward other individuals. So you can understand why there was this conflict. The end result was my friend and his mother had a very tense relationship for as long as I knew him. I knew my friend since the early 1970s. His mother, I think, was kind of a worse version of him, if that's even possible to imagine, but she was. She was a very, very messed up individual. She's deceased now, long deceased. But for as long as she was alive, my friend and his mother would constantly be fighting. As she got older, the fighting diminished. They began to get along somewhat better. But for reasons unclear to me, when my friend was told that he had to get rid of a certain number of his dogs, he convinced his friend, Steve, and his mother to pack up many of their belongings into Steve's car. Ira could not drive, and drive up to New York City. Well, there I used his name, but again, he's deceased anyway, so I apologize for using his first name. I will not use his last name. Once they were in New York City, they went, for some reason unknown to me, into Central Park, which is a huge park in uptown Manhattan. I have been there many, many times. It is a huge park, larger than Vatican City. His mother, who was then in her 90s, Steve, and Ira got lost from each other, according to Ira. And that's an important qualification because I don't necessarily believe everything Ira told me, but I think this may be true to some extent. And they could not find each other for a few weeks. A few weeks. I don't know how they survived. I guess they begged to a certain extent. They ate out of garbage cans. It is hard for me to imagine Ira's mother. She was a very dignified person, eating out of a garbage can. But according to Ira, that is precisely what she did. That's also what Ira did, and that is also what Steve did. So I don't know how they made it, but somehow they did. On their way up to New York City, they stayed in a motel. When they were in that motel, they left the dogs. I don't know how many, 10 dogs? And it was just a regular sedan type car. It wasn't a large car. In the car, 10 huge dogs in a car. The police in that area, I believe it was in North Carolina, saw the dogs and they rescued them. The dogs would have died. And they found out which motel room Ira, Steve, and Ira's mother was staying in, and they arrested Steve and booked him. Even till this day, there is a photo, a booking photo, a mugshot of Ira on the web. If I gave you his last name, which I will not, you can find that photo. And not a bad photo, to be honest, but it is a booking photo. And Ira had a good attorney, and somehow he managed to have the charges either reduced or eliminated. It's not entirely clear which, because Ira often would lie. He would lie pathologically. He would lie about everything, even when there was no reason to lie. But he would lie. He always found a reason for lying. I never understood it, but he always found a reason for lying. Somehow, when Ira was in Central Park, he, Steve, and his mother found each other, and they made their way back down to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. By that time, their lawyer had dealt effectively with the courts. I don't know exactly what the settlement was. And even if Ira had told me, I would not have believed him. That is how untrustworthy a source of information he was, if you could even call it information. I mean, one time I remember, and in retrospect, it is, I guess, somewhat humorous. Ira was in his 60s at that time. So I was in my early 50s at that time. I'm now 67, so this is a while back. And what happened is that Ira claimed that he joined an online dating service. No, I'm 68, not 67. 68, that's right, 68. He joined an online dating service, and he lied about his age. He said that he was 30. And I thought to myself, nobody is going to believe that Ira is 30. I mean, Ira did not look prehistoric, but he looked his age. He certainly looked his age. And I told him that. I said, Ira, why would you tell potential dating partners, that you are 30 when you and I both know that you do not look 30. And he said, Mark, I have been getting 1,000 responses to my ad an hour. 1,000 an hour. A blatant lie. But Ira was also bipolar. That may be some part of it, I'm not sure. But I would imagine his bipolar disorder did play into this. About 2 months later, I brought up the topic again with him, and about the idea that he was getting 1,000 responses to his ad an hour, and he said, "No, I got no responses at all." Yeah, right. And I said, "Ira, you told me that you were getting 1,000 an hour," and he said, "Well, I don't know why I would have told you that." And I said, "I don't know either, but you did." That was the end of that conversation. Ira lied about everything. Everything. You could not believe anything that man said. Very tragic. And he used people, including me for a while, for money. Ira never worked a day in his life. Not a single day in his life. He lived off of his mother's retirement benefits, which came partially from his father, who had died before I met Ira. His father was a federal district court judge. That I know because I looked it up. So we had a decent retirement, I assume, not wonderful, but decent. And it enabled Ira to have some money. But that is how Ira lived. He never had a job in his life. That's the only source of sustenance that Ira had. His father's pension, which he got from his mother. Why his mother gave Ira that money, I have no idea. But she did. As I said, his mother was even more messed up than Ira was. So that's probably not hard to understand why she would have done that. Regardless, Ira, who claimed to be a follower of Mayor Baba, would go around primarily to women and tell them, I can do a psychic reading for you. And just to test him, I know what a psychic reading is. I don't believe in them, but I know what they are. And so I asked him to do one on me. And I have had people do psychic readings on me that had experience in doing psychic readings. Ira had no idea of what he was saying. He was simply making things up on the fly. That's all he was doing. Ira claimed to be the messenger of Mayor Baba on the earth after Mayor Baba's death. He claimed to be a perfect master. He claimed to be a divine teacher. I later found a statement written by Mayor Baba, which said that none of my followers can ever claim to be a teacher, a master, or anything that will give them any kind of spiritual distinction. If they do, they are not a follower of mine. I went to Ira with that information. He looked shocked, reasonably. I would expect him to look shocked. And he said, well, but I'm an exception. And I said, Ira, why are you an exception? Why? You're not an exception, Ira. You're just a regular guy like me. That's what ended our friendship. I kept on saying he was a regular guy whenever Ira would make these fantastic claims for himself. And he ended our friendship with his usual bad acting, pretending that he was suddenly angry at me, whereas the reality was he simply got tired of me telling him when he would say he's a master, me telling him, no, I don't believe that you are a master. That's ultimately what the whole thing came down to. So um, Ira was a troubled man. He tried many paths to success in life. He tried going to the Jungian Institute of New York. He was kicked out almost immediately because of his horrible behavior, I assume connected with his bipolar disorder, but I don't know that. But Ira was really, he was kind of a mess. And the older he got, the worse he got. Because Ira was not medicated. And why was that? Here's the story Ira told me. And this is an example of what I mean by his lying. He said that one time he was committed to a psychiatric hospital, a state hospital in New York. I don't know which one, but I assume that part of it is true. And he said that when he was there, he went to see a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist put him on some medication. I don't know what it was. I didn't ask him what it was, but some medication. And Ira said that he felt like he was losing his mind. He was crawling out of his skin. And so he escaped, he said, from that hospital. I don't think that he was committed, so I think escaping was simply a matter of walking out the front door and going away, but he claimed that he escaped. And he said that later on, he spoke with another psychiatrist, and that this psychiatrist had told him that he is the only person in the world who cannot take psychotropic or antipsychotic drugs. Blatant lie. I said, Ira, I know what happened to you. I know because I am on psychotropic drugs. As an autistic, I am on numerous psychotropic drugs, in fact, and with two of them, for the first 48 hours, I was a wreck. I had no idea what was wrong with me. I had to call my physician the first time. I wish she would have cautioned me in advance. She didn't. But apparently, that is a common symptom with some psychotropic drugs, that you feel like you're losing your mind for the first couple of days. And I did. And so I said, Ira, what you experienced is common, is even ordinary. At that point, I could tell Ira was lying. Why? Because he kind of rolled his eyes up. He didn't know that. He simply assumed that he was the only person in the world who could not take psychotropic drugs. No psychiatrist would have ever told. What psychiatrist would say, I'm sorry, you are the only person in the world that I can't medicate? Come on. You know, so Ira was kind of a mess. He was kind of a wreck, and it was hard to make sense out of anything that he said. But back to the issue of Ira as a follower of Mayor Baba, as a quote unquote Baba lover, and his friend Steve, who was also a Baba lover, and who claimed that Ira was his perfect master, which in itself made no sense to me, because his friend Steve always struck me as being reasonably normal, whatever reasonably is. He seemed like a regular guy to me. Ira was anything but that, but not Steve. Steve was pretty ordinary, as best I could tell. And yet Steve had pretty much thrown his life away. He was a registered nurse, but he threw his career away and spent his whole life living with Ira. His mother, for as long as she lived, because Steve told me this, and Steve, I believed, would call Steve and yell at him, what's wrong with you? You're ruining your life because of that monster. And I said, well, Steve, I think she's right. And he said, maybe she was right, but if so, this is my destiny. I said, Steve, no, it's not. Your destiny is what you create. You have told yourself that it's your destiny. You have convinced yourself that you need to live with Ira, but you don't. You can leave anytime you want. You have a car. He does not. You have a professional qualification as an RN. He has no education whatsoever, and not even a driver's license. So he couldn't do anything. There's nothing that Ira could do. But Steve would not budge. So when I found out that thing about there being no perfect masters in the Bob movement, and Ira basically said I'm an exception, I realized that finally that confirmed that there was something definitely wrong with it, with Ira and what he was saying to me. Another thing, Mayor Baba was an odd fellow. No reference to the organization called Odd Fellows. And as an odd fellow, on many levels, Ira had a very difficult time with human relationships. He always wanted a good relationship with a woman, but they always seemed to pass him by. And it's very easy to see why, given Ira's behavior. I don't see how a woman could tolerate him for more than a few hours. And that's typically what happened to him. But what Ira told me is that one time when Mayor Baba was driving in a car, being driven around in a car in the US, he told the driver, go faster and faster and faster. I don't know about you, but I don't care who it was. If somebody told me that, I would say, no. I'm sorry, I'm not going to drive faster and faster. I'm not going to kill myself. It never happened. But regardless, drive faster and faster and faster. So, according to Ira, the driver did that, which he didn't. And eventually the driver crashed and died. And Mayor Baba became a paraplegic and spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Now, he did spend time in a wheelchair, but it was not for that reason. That was a story that Ira made up. Another one. Maybe I would say not as extreme as the other one, but maybe as extreme. I'm not sure. Mayor Baba kept silent for about 40 years or so. I may have the number of years wrong, 30, 40 years, something like that. And it was a part of a spiritual pledge. He felt that people had talked too much. The world does not need words anymore. So he pledged not to speak. But what he said was, and I know he said this because I actually read it in one of his books, that when I break my silence, when I talk again, the world will come to know that I am the one whom they have been waiting for. Mayor Baba died in 1967, I believe. Where are all those people who have come to know that he is the one that they've been waiting for? I don't see them. I don't see any evidence that he broke his silence. So there are some people in that movement who claim that he let out a large scream before he died. Who knows if that's true, but regardless, that was the claim, that he would break his silence. He said he would do that. Then the world would know that he was the one they've been waiting for. One time he said, gather at a particular place and I will break my silence there. He used a kind of sign language. First, he used an alphabet board, then he switched to his own original sign language. According to Ira, I have no idea if this is true. I would assume it is not, but I don't know. A lot of people gathered on a farm A farm, I have no idea why a farm, but a farm, supposedly. They were all sitting there and thinking and saying, where is Baba? That's what they called him. That's what they referred to him. Where is Daddy? Where is Papa? Where's Baba? And so finally, according to Ira, somebody went out searching for him on the farm. They went out searching for him. It's like you have to be crazy to even believe something like this, but whatever. They went out searching for him on the farm. They found him in the barn, in the barn, in the barn, rolling around, and I will be polite here, in horse dung, rolling around in horse dung, totally naked, rolling around in horse dung. He never broke his silence. Mayor Baba said that one of the relatively regular features of an avatar, or the avatar, because to them there's only one avatar who gets reincarnated every 1,000 years or so. So to them, Mayor Baba, Muhammad, Jesus, Krishna, etc., were all literally the same exact soul, the same being. That all of them are relatively insane, but their insanity is a sign of sanity, if that makes any sense to you. It doesn't to me, but their insanity is a sign of sanity. And so they behave in ways that most people would call insane. But that's basically a way to show the world that what they may think is sane is not really sane. What they may think as insane is not really insane either. And interestingly, Mayor Baba spent much of his life, when he was still living in India, working with people called the musts. The musts. That is a relatively common type of people in parts of India. I don't know the history of it. They're basically poor people who live off of mendicancy or begging, and many of them don't speak. Many of them are kind of crazy, I guess, in a way. So I guess in the US, they might be, in the past, prior to Ronald Reagan, in a psychiatric hospital, now in a prison or on the streets, because Reagan cut all those programs. Regardless, that these musts were people who basically needed somebody else to look after them. And so Mayor Baba would do that. And so I guess eventually Mayor Baba turned into a kind of must himself. In any event, I could go on and on and on with stories about Ira and stories about Mayor Baba. The problem I have, honestly, in understanding Mayor Baba was, for a long time, I based my understandings of him on what Ira told me. After I realized that almost everything that Ira told me was a lie, I had to go back to the ground level and figure out, okay, I can't trust anything that this guy told me. I need to find out exactly what happened, who he was, on my own. And that is what I did. That was a very difficult experience for me. Not spiritually, but just intellectually, having to go back and read the stuff and figure out who this man was, and realizing literally that one by one by one by one, every single thing that Ira said about him was a blatant lie. A blatant lie. Or I guess you could attribute it to some extent to his bipolar disorder. I would assume it somehow was a mixture of both, because Ira was a liar. He lied all the time. I often said, even to him sometimes, Ira, you seem to lie for sport. And he would laugh. He would laugh. He thought that was funny. He didn't challenge me. That was early in our relationship. Later on, he became less patient, less tolerant. I guess that's what happened to him as it got older. My feeling is that generally, as we get older, and I'm an old man myself, one of two things happen. If you have some type of grounding in something, helping other people, like to become communists or helping people spiritually, then at least you are living outside of yourself. You're not totally wrapped up inside yourself. And you will most likely have a relatively good old age. That was not true with Ira. And so as Ira got older and older, he became worse and worse and worse. And that was the tragedy of Ira. That was also, I think, the tragedy of Mayor Baba, because, Mayor Baba's ideas were twisted by Ira. Not that I feel bad for Mayor Baba, but I do feel bad for him that he did what he did. I mean, who are we in this world if not the culmination of our deeds, of our good deeds, of how much we have helped other people, including to become emancipated from capitalism, to become spiritualized? Who are we if we are not that? I ask myself that question all the time. And I think that simply by asking myself that question, I keep myself to some degree on, as the saying goes, the straight and narrow. And so I have tried to live a good life. I've tried to be good and kind to others. I've tried. And I think generally I have been, to be honest. Am I perfect? Nobody's perfect. But I think I've tried. And trying is really all we can do. Ira did not try. Ira could not try because of the situation he was in, because of his bipolar disorder, because of his refusal to face who he was, to get the proper treatment that he really needed, his awful relationship with his mother, the fact that he never worked a day in his life and lived off of his father's pension, which came from his mother. So I feel bad for Ira, because Ira, in the end, and he's deceased, his memorial is on YouTube. And again, if I told you his last name, you could find it. It's not terribly interesting, so you're not missing out on much, but it is on YouTube. But that's where it is. And Ira did not amount to much, sadly. And I feel bad for that, because I liked him at a time. I also disliked him at a time, especially when he called me up and screamed his head off at me, even though I knew he was being phony. But still, this is my good friend who, for no reason, is calling and screaming at me. But he did. And so the Mayor Baba movement, where is it? I don't know. I don't know. I know it is not what it was. It is not what it was in the 60s or even the 70s or 80s. It has declined significantly. Many religions, which started around the late 60s, early 1970s in the Western world, including the Baba movement, are dying or have died already. That period was a time of tremendous spiritual interest among young people. A lot of gurus were around at that time, like the Beatles became followers of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the founder of transcendental meditation, but there were others as well. There were the Jesus freaks, whom I remember very, very well. A lot of spiritual movements at that time that have basically all died out. They're not around. And so that period in US history, and more broadly in the history of the First World, ended. It ended, I would say, for the most part in the early 1970s. You can extend it if you want, maybe for another 10 years, but to a very limited degree. Certainly now, hardly anybody is interested in those kinds of things. If people are interested in anything, it's in therapy. I'm not saying I have any objection to that. I see therapists myself, 3 of them. In fact, I don't care. People can see a therapist if they want. I benefit from it to a degree, maybe. I'm not really sure half the time. But therapy is not enough. There has to be, as Roy Bhaskar, the founder of critical realism, said some kind of transcendental aspect to one's life. If one is not living for the transcendent while one is here, one is living literally for nothing. And I would say, unfortunately, that is what happened to Ira. I hope that Steve, now that Ira is gone, has at least to some degree gotten his house in order. I hope. I hope he has. For the time being, this has been Mark, by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.